If you dream of desiccated corpses coming to life, vile poison infecting your enemies, and infinite towers of bone rising to the sky, then you just might be destined to play the Necromancer. This is the Necromancer guide for Season 1. First, a couple of quick notes about this guide itself. This guide is up to date for the launch of the game, so you can be sure that you're prepared for Diablo Immortal launch. You can find the written version of this guide at immortal.maxroll.gg. Greg 2G is the author of the written guide, so all the recommendations in this guide are his. We'll keep you up to date as we discover new information about the game before and after launch. A new version of this video guide will be posted for Season 2, so make sure that you're subscribed for that. This guide is separated by chapters, so look below and click ahead to the part that you need. Now, consume the corpses around you as you watch this video and you learn to become a commander of the undead. As commanders of the undead and masters of bone and blight, the necromancers of Diablo Immortal control it all. With strong area of effect and crowd control abilities, as well as summons that both soak and deal massive amounts of damage, this class excels at nearly all roles. Its powerful summons make it far and away the best class for solo content. Corpses provide a unique resource to necromancers that is unavailable to any other class, offering a powerful and challenging resource to manage. Let's take a look at Necromancer's strengths. It's a versatile class. Necromancers have reliable options for support via bone armor, single target damage via command skeletons, AoE damage via corpse explosion, and CC via bone wall. They also excel at surviving and keeping their allies and minions alive. The command golem ability taunts monsters, forcing their attacks upon it for a time. Bone armor, when combined with parting gift, gives you, your party, and your minions a buff with 5 charges that can absorb 5 attacks no matter how large the damage before the shield fades. This is a must-have survival ability in any Helliquary raid group. In PvP, necromancers have many options as well. The strongest ability is Bone Wall. This, combined with Exhumant's Backbone, gives you 3 charges of a bone pillar that first knocks back, then stuns, and then remains in the battlefield for several seconds, slowing and potentially continually damaging via Pyre's Allure. On top of that, they have Bone Spikes, an ability with 2 charges that can stun all enemies within a 45-degree arc in front of you. Now let's talk about weaknesses. Necromancers have trouble with mobility. The Necromancer's only option for mobility is Wraith form, and the best legendary affixes for this ability clash with other great legendary options. As a result, the best builds for a Necromancer typically abandon Wraith form in favor of higher DPS or support skills. Range. Nearly all of the best abilities for this class are short to mid-range, so you have to get up close and personal with your enemies. While this does make you more squishy, keep in mind that short-ranged abilities are usually balanced around a higher risk and reward. What to expect from the Necromancer. Strong raid buffs. Minions for all situations. The best ultimate in the game, rewarding tactical play in PvP, great AoE, and single target damage. As for weaknesses, they lack mobility. They can be reliant on their unique resource, corpses. Constant build swapping, many short to mid-range abilities, and they have the worst class consumable in the game. Starting your Necromancer on the right foot is key in order to make your character as powerful as possible. First, find better equipment for your character. Your bag flashes when you pick up better equipment. Turn on auto pickup for all item types and settings, and periodically return to town to salvage and upgrade your items. Unlock Skeletal Mage at level 20. This stationary summon is great for getting 100 plus kill streaks. Claim the Battle Pass legendary item. Earning battle points unlocks special rewards, including an early legendary item that will increase your character's power. Take the Baleful Trinity for maximum damage. Hunt legendary items. Keep an eye out for Desolatorias specifically. It's one of the strongest items the Necromancer can find. Find normal and legendary gems. Hidden Layers have a chance to drop normal gems, and if you use a crest, Elder Rifts have a chance to drop legendary gems. Unlock the Helliquary at level 41. Unlock the Helliquary as soon as you can, so you always receive scoria from your daily activity rewards. Alright, let's get into the builds for Necromancer. First, our solo build, Summoner Necromancer. The Summoner Necromancer is a classic in Diablo games. This build deals an insane amount of single target damage and decent area of effect damage. You will have nearly 100% uptime on Command Skeletons, Command Golem, Skeletal Mage, and Dark Curse. As the commander on the battlefield, you're able to move freely and safely as your minions do your bidding. Soulfire is your primary attack. This is an amazing source of damage, and the ultimate ability, Hungering Soulfire, is great for both burning down large groups of enemies as well as bosses. Baleful Trinity gives an extra area of effect damage for the Soulfire. Dark Curse. Combined with Guided by Maggots, this gives you access to an amazing buff for your summons. Use Linger Mantle to make it last even longer. Skeletal Mage. This offers some solid piercing damage with a nice short cooldown. Command Golem. In its Molten Golem form, via Desolatoria, this is a great tank and source of AoE damage. Use Visitant's Sign so it lasts a bit longer. Command Skeletons. This is a great source of single target damage while being quite tanky at the same time. Now let's get to our legendary items. In our head slot we have Visitant Sign. Command Golem duration increased by 20%. For shoulders, Linger Mantle. Dark Curse duration increased by 30%. For our main hand we have Desolatoria. Command Golem now summons a Molten Golem that continually burns nearby enemies instead of forcing them to attack it or stunning them. For our chest we have Exhumant's Backbone. Bone Wall instead summons a pillar of rotting corpses that knocks targets into the air, damaging them and then slows all nearby enemies. For legs, we have Guided by Maggots. Dark Curse no longer decreases enemy vision, instead causing your minions within the area to frenzy, increasing their attack and movement speeds. For our offhand, we have Baleful Trinity. Soulfire now bounces to one additional target, but deals 30% decreased damage to subsequent targets. Now let's get to our gameplay. With the Summoner Necromancer build, you want to stutter step while constantly using your primary attack. Drop your Skeletal Mage in key positions to keep a kill streak going, or on top of the boss to focus their attacks. Keep your Golem and Skeletons in the fight by moving them from one pack to the next. First, you'll want to summon your Molten Golem via Command Golem. Then, summon your Skeletal Mage if you're in a good position to do so. Activate Command Skeletons and Command Golem to order your Skeleton Champions and Molten Golem to leap charge close to the Skeletal Mage. Fourth, you'll want to cast Dark Curse on top of all of your summons to increase their attack and movement speed. Pay attention to your Skeletal Mage cooldown and delay your Dark Curse cast if you can summon another Skeletal Mage in the next 3 seconds. Use Command Skeletons to buff your Skeletal Champions as soon as it comes off of cooldown. Use Command Golem on cooldown to have the Molten Golem leap wherever there are 5 or more enemies. Using this ability against bosses is a DPS loss. Use your Soulfire primary attack to fill in all gaps between these other steps. Alright, now let's move on to our raid build for the Necromancer Summoner Support. The Summoner Support build allows you to focus on keeping your allies alive while fighting Helliquary bosses by using Bone Armor with Parting Gift. Timed well, this skill lets you ignore some raid boss mechanics. But that's not all. You still do a very good amount of damage by summoning Command Skeletons and Command Golem to do the dirty work while you focus on protecting your allies. Let's get into our skills. Soulfire is our primary attack. This is an amazing source of damage, and the ultimate ability, Hungering Soulfire, is great for both burning down large groups of enemies as well as bosses. Bone Armor, when enhanced by Parting Gift, Great Digger's Weight, and Graven Bulwark, will help you keep your summons and your party alive. Command Skeletons are a great source of single target damage, while being quite tanky at the same time. While using Life and Balance, they also absorb some damage that you take. Command Golem in its Molten Golem form via Desolatoria is a great tank and source of AoE damage. Use Visitant Sign so that it lasts a bit longer. Wraith form. Now, a bit of mobility goes a long way in raids. Use it to position yourself so that you can buff your teammates or save your cooldown to protect your own life. Now let's get into our legendary items. In the head slot we have Visitant Sign. Command Golem duration increased by 20%. For our shoulders, we have Grave Dirt's Weight. Bone Armor now also grants immunity to all effects which knock you out of your position. For our main hand, we have Desolatoria. Command Golem now summons a Molten Golem that continually burns nearby enemies instead of forcing them to attack it or stunning them. For our chest slot, we have Parting Gift. Bone Armor now grants you and all nearby party members charges of damage immunity, each of which prevent all damage from a single hit. For our legs, we have Graven Bulwark. Bone armor duration increased by 25%. For our offhand, we have life in balance. 10% of all damage you take is taken by your skeletal champions instead. Voice communication with your team makes playing raid support much easier, as you can tell your party when to gather together for the bone armor buff. That being said, most of the time you probably won't be on voice and have to spend most of your time chasing down your party members in an attempt to cast bone armor on them. First of all, use bone armor on cooldown when there's at least one or more party members within range, if there's no large attacks to prepare for. Otherwise, save the cooldown for a big attack. Second, summon your molten golem. Third, command your skeletal champions to charge as soon as the ability is available to boost their attack speed. Fourth, order your molten golem to leap in the rare case that you find mobs grouped up in the raid. This should not happen very often. Fifth, use Soulfire as filler damage. Avoid using it when you need to reposition quickly. Now let's talk about our solo challenge rift build, Rotting Corpses. Rotting Corpses is a corpse explosion based build that makes quick work of any solo challenge rift. It maximizes AoE damage with its lingering poison granted by Rot Spur. You produce corpses with the 5 skeletons provided by ever-grasping vestments and by commanding your molten golem, summoned by Desolatoria, to stomp all over Hell's minions. Now let's look at our skills. Soulfire is our primary attack. This is an amazing source of damage, and the ultimate ability, Hungering Soulfire, is great for both burning down large groups of enemies as well as bosses. Baleful Trinity gives extra area of effect damage for the Soulfire. Bone Wall, when combined with ever-grasping vestments, is a great source of crowd control and corpses. Command Golem, in its molten golem form via Desolatoria, is a great tank and source of AoE damage. Use Visitant Sign so it lasts a bit longer. Corpse Explosion is the main source of damage with its lingering poison granted by Rot Spur. Dark Curse is an easy set and forget source of AoE damage when combined with Mournful Destroyer. Now let's get into our legendary items. In our head slot we have Visitant Sign. Command Golem duration increased by 20%. For our shoulders we have Rot Spur. Corpse Explosion no longer detonates corpses, causing them instead to release blight on the area that poisons enemies for continual damage. For our main ham, we have Desolatoria. Command Golem now summons a molten golem that continually burns nearby enemies instead of forcing them to attack it or stunning them. In our chest slot, we have Ever-Grasping Vestments. Bonewall now summons a line of skeletal soldiers that charge forward in formation, damaging and knocking back enemies. For our leg slot, we have Mournful Destroyer. Dark Curse now curses the ground in an area, causing enemies within it to take continual damage. And finally, for our offhand, we have Baleful Trinity. Soulfire now bounces to one additional target, but deals 30% decreased damage to subsequent targets. Now let's talk about our gameplay. Kite large groups of enemies, staying relatively close in order to explode the corpses of our fallen enemies and allies. The first corpse in a high-level challenge rift is likely to be the corpse of your molten golem. Don't forget to explode it when it falls. First, summon the Molten Golem with Command Golem and run in the rift until you can gather at least 15 enemies to kite in a suitable area that isn't too narrow. Alternatively, keep running until you find the first group of elite monsters. Use your Bone Wall to push the enemies into a tight group. Command your Molten Golem to leap onto the enemies. Kite the enemies in tight circles while spamming Soulfire and the occasional Corpse Explosion. It's hard to see the first corpses hit the ground within a large group. Continue kiting the enemies through the lingering poison while using every ability as soon as it's off cooldown. If the Hungering Soulfire is fully charged and the Rift progress bar is less than 80% full, use your ultimate on the next large group of monsters. Otherwise, save it for the Rift Guardian since it's your highest damage skill. Alright, let's talk about the first of 2 of our PvP builds for the Necromancer, Embalmer. A special thanks for this PvP build goes to beta players The Kurt and Eclipse. Thank you so much for your help with this build. The Embalmer Necromancer PvP build takes a more aggressive approach to Battlegrounds. Hideous Dawning removes the stun from Bone Spikes, and instead gives it 3 charges of massive stacking AoE bleed damage. You have Bone Pillars with Exhument's Backbone for control, and Bone Armor with Grave Dirt's Weight for survivability. Add another layer of control and survivability with Wraith Form coupled with Proximal Fear. This allows you to dive at groups of enemies, dealing massive damage and causing them to scatter. Now let's get into our skills. Bone Spear. This is our primary attack. This will get us some extra poison damage from Blight Maw. Also, when used with Pyre's Allure, it allows you to ignite your Bone Pillars to damage enemies that get near them. Bone Wall. This will turn into a bone pillar when combined with Exhument's Backbone. Bone Spikes is your main damage ability, and this gets stacking bleed damage from Hideous Dawning. Wraith Form will give you some ability, crowd control, and extra damage while wearing Proximal Fear. Bone Armor allows you to absorb some damage, and it grants knockback immunity while Bone Armor is active thanks to Grave Dirt's weight. Now let's get into our legendary items. In our head slot we have Hideous Dawning. Bone Spikes now also cause enemies to bleed for additional damage, but no longer stuns them. For our shoulder slot we have Grave Dirt's weight. Bone Armor now also grants immunity to all effects which knock you out of your position. In our main hand we have Blight Maw. Bone Spear also poisons enemies hit for damage over 3 seconds. In our chest slot we have Exhument's Backbone. Bone Wall instead summons a pillar of rotting corpses that knocks targets into the air, damaging them and then slows all nearby enemies. In our leg slot we have Proximal Fear. Wraith Form now causes enemies you touch to flee in fear and damages them. For our offhand, we have Pyre's Allure. Bone Wall can now be ignited with Soulfire, dealing damage over 8 seconds to nearby enemies. Now let's get into our gameplay. Play this build aggressively and fight around your Bone Wall's Bone Pillars while casting Bone Spikes on as many enemy players as possible. You want to still be mindful of your role as a space controller and make sure that you're using those Bone Pillars wisely. First of all, check out your minimap and see where the majority of enemies are going to preemptively place Bone Wall's Bone Pillars there and ignite the pillars with your Bone Spear. Second, use Bone Armor on cooldown, being mindful of your party's positions to protect them as well. Then, as the enemy approaches, start aiming your Bone Spikes and wait until you can hit 3 or more people with it if possible. Position yourself close enough to the Bone Pillars so you can still hit enemies with your Bone Spear when they approach them. Replace any Bone Pillars that despawn, but try to save one for emergency situations. Start throwing your Bone Spears at approaching enemies while weaving in Bone Spikes. Keep 1 charge of Bone Spikes to cast on enemies as they attempt to retreat for healing. Activate Wraith Form and run on top of enemies to damage and fear them. Alright, let's get into our second PvP build for the Necromancer, In Control. With this Necromancer PvP build, you will feel in control of the battlegrounds. You have access to 5 total charges of stuns from 2 abilities, Bone Wall and Bone Spikes. The 3 charges of Bone Wall from Exhument's Backbone turn into pillars that spring forth from the ground to toss your enemies into the air. The pillar then remains in the battlefield, slowing the movement of any enemies who dare to try to approach. Bone Spikes combined with the effect from No Mouth Face gives you 2 charges of an instant cast stun to stop those enemies who charge through your Bone Pillars. Let's get into our skills. Bone Spear, this is our primary attack. This will give you some extra poison damage from Blight Maw. Also, when used with Pyre's Allure, it allows you to ignite your Bone Pillars to damage enemies that get near them. Bone Wall will turn into Bone Pillar when combined with Exhument's Backbone. They also last longer thanks to Sacral Chasses. Bone Spikes is a massive stun ability that becomes instant cast when wearing No Mouth Face. Dark Curse. This blinds the enemy to the point where they can only see anyone within melee range and also disables aim assists. Bone Armor allows you to absorb some damage and it grants knockback immunity while Bone Armor is active thanks to Grave Dirt's weight. Now let's talk about our legendary items. In our head slot we have No Mouth Face. Bone Spikes no longer charges up, and instead immediately summons 3 forward-moving spikes that knock enemies away. In our shoulder slot we have Grave Dirt's weight. Bone Armor now also grants immunity to all effects which knock you out of your position. For our main hand we have Blight Maw. Bone Spear also poisons enemies hit for damage over 3 seconds. For our chest slot we have Exhument's Backbone. Bone Wall instead summons a pillar of rotting corpses that knocks targets into the air, damaging them and then slows all nearby enemies. For our legs, we have Sacral Chasses. Bone Wall duration increased by 25%. For our offhand, we have Pyre's Allure. Bone Wall can now be ignited with Soulfire, dealing damage over 8 seconds to nearby enemies. Alright, let's get into our gameplay. This Necromancer PvP build requires some patience and discipline. It's easy to get excited and blow all of your stun charges in 3 seconds. Position your Bone Pillars well, only using them to stun in emergency situations. Instead, use Bone Spikes as the first go-to stun. First, watch the minimap to find out where the majority of your enemies are going. Go there and plant 2 of your Bone Wall's Bone Pillars in strategic locations. Ignite the Bone Pillars with Bone Spear. Always try to keep one charge available for emergencies. Use bone armor on cooldown. Join in the fight and prioritize using bone spikes on the largest group of enemies possible. Follow up with Dark Curse and get close enough to start hitting them with Bone Spear. Alright, let's talk about set items for the Necromancer. The best set for the Necromancer by far is Shepherd's Call to Wolves. This is a pet-oriented set. For our 3 items equipped, we have damage done by summons increased by 15%. And for our 6 set items equipped, critical strike chance for you and your summons is increased by 3% per active summon, up to a maximum increase of 18%. Now let's talk about our starter legendary gems. Start your build with these easy to obtain 1 and 2 star legendary gems. Everlasting Torment. This deals incredible damage over time after a critical hit. For a simple 1-star legendary gem, this packs a real punch. Fervent Fang does fantastic single target damage. It can easily be acquired from the battle pass, without relying on luck from crests. Berserker's Eye provides increased damage in all cases, if you're willing to take on more damage. Karasan's Invigoration combines well with the Necromancer's strong primary attack and ultimate ability. Seled's Weakening gives a frequent damage boost anytime you kill elites, making it have natural synergy with the Necromancer. Chain Death gives a solid damage boost, especially in AoE situations. Now let's talk about our best in slot legendary gems. Legendary gems provide incredible stat bonuses and unique effects. They're found as a reward after completing an Elder Rift that's enhanced with a legendary crest. Many of them are also crafted using runes and platinum at the jeweler in Westmarch. Bloodsoaked Jade is the best legendary gem in the game. It provides a massive amount of damage and much needed movement speed for the Necromancer. Seeping Bile has a poison that is devastating in large densities, like in Elder and Challenge Rifts. It also slows enemies affected at higher ranks. This synergizes perfectly with Corpse Explosion and Rot Spur. Frozen Heart provides great damage reduction versus ranged enemies and a chance to chill nearby enemies at higher ranks. Another must-have for our slow mid-range Necromancer. Chip of Stone Flesh has a chance to petrify a target and gives you a damage boost on top of it. Petrifying enemies can keep you alive in a challenge rift or secure a kill in PvP, making this an incredible choice. Howler's Call has a chance to summon a Spirit Wolf while primary attacking, which we do a lot of that as Necromancer. Another summon at our command, which can also stun enemies struck when ranked up. Echoing Shade is a gem that has the potential to be in the number 1 spot once ranked up. At rank 1, it summons a shadow clone that uses some of your abilities. At later ranks, it can summon up to 4 clones. Now let's take a look at every skill available for the Necromancer. This section is for your reference, so you can make your own builds. Our first primary attack is Bone Spear. Shoot a piercing Bone Spear forward to inflict damage and pierce up to 2 additional enemies. Damage reduced by 50% for each additional enemy pierced. Its ultimate is Dread Skull Scythe. Enhance Bone Spear for 12 seconds, instead swinging a massive scythe that deals damage to all nearby enemies and knocks them away. Soulfire. Throw a ball of Soulfire that explodes when it strikes an enemy, inflicting damage to the target and 25% as much to all other nearby enemies. Its ultimate is Hungering Soulfire. Enhance Soulfire for 12 seconds, instead launching multiple Greater Bone Spirits that seek out enemies and deal damage each. Targets hit multiple times simultaneously take 25% cumulatively reduced damage. Bone Armor. Protect yourself and nearby allies with a shield of bones that absorbs damage for 12 seconds. Bone Spikes. Summon bone spikes that erupt from the ground, stunning enemies for 2 seconds and dealing damage. Charging longer increases range and damage. Bone Spirits. Unleash a continual barrage of Bone Spirits, dealing damage to enemies. Using Bone Spirits slowly consumes its energy, which recovers while Bone Spirits is not in use. Bone Wall. Conjure a wall of bones for 9.2 seconds that blocks the movement of all enemies and allies, and also blocks all enemy projectiles. Maximum 3 charges. Command Golem. Summon a Bone Golem for 24 seconds. When summoned, it will deal damage to all nearby enemies and stun them for 2 seconds. While it is active, you can order the Golem to leap to a nearby location, where it will deal damage and force all nearby enemy monsters to attack it for 6 seconds. Command Skeletons. Active. Command your skeletal champions to charge to a location and increase attack speed by 80% for 4.5 seconds. Passive. Raise a skeletal champion every 8 seconds to a maximum of 4. Skeletal champions deal damage per attack. Corpse Explosion. Detonate all corpses in the target area, each corpse dealing damage to all nearby enemies. Enemies struck by multiple simultaneous explosions take 40% cumulatively reduced damage for each additional hit. Corpse Lance. Summon projectiles from nearby corpses that impale the target and other random nearby enemies. Each corpse summons 3 lances that each deal damage. Multiple hits on the same target deal 20% cumulatively reduced damage. Dark Curse. Curse all enemies in the area, dealing damage to them over 6 seconds and greatly reducing their vision. Grim Scythe. Slash with a summoned scythe, dealing damage to all enemies in front of you. Each enemy hit generates a corpse, up to a maximum of 2. Maximum 2 charges. Skeletal Mage. Summon an immobile skeletal mage for 13 seconds that throws bolts of soulfire in a direction, each dealing damage to all enemies in the bolt's path. You may not command more than 6 total skeletal champions and skeletal mages. Wraith Form. Transform into a wraith, gaining 50% increased movement speed and invulnerability for 2 seconds. During this time, you cannot attack. Now let's take a look at every legendary available in the game for the Necromancer. This section's for your reference to help you plan out your own builds. Let's get started. Mirror Ictus. Your skeletal champions are replaced with skeletal archers. Coals for Eyes. Command Skeletons now causes your skeletal champions to explode at their destination, damaging all nearby enemies. Crown of the Gilded Leash. Command Skeletons now raises a single powerful skeletal captain that can be ordered to whirlwind at a location. Hideous Dawning. Bone Spikes now also causes enemies to bleed for additional damage, but no longer stuns them. No Mouth Face. Bone Spikes no longer charges up and instead immediately summons 3 forward-moving spikes that knock enemies away. Skull Veil. Skeletal Mage duration increased by 20%. Visitant Sign. Command Golem duration increased by 20%. Rot Spur. Corpse Explosion no longer detonates corpses, causing them instead to release blight on the area that poisons enemies for continual damage. Lone Preserver. Corpse Explosion now also inflicts a stacking chill which can freeze enemies when stacked. Surge and Stillness. Corpse Explosion now also causes corpses to pull themselves towards the nearest enemy before exploding. Chasm Crosser. Bone Spike's range increased by 20%. Ziroko. Skeletal Mage damage increased by 10%. Linger Mantle. Dark Curse duration increased by 30%. Grave Dirt's Weight. Bone Armor now also grants immunity to all effects which knock you out of your position. Parting Gift. Bone Armor now grants you and all nearby party members charges of damage immunity, each of which prevents all damage from a single hit. Gallows Born. Generate corpses as you move during Wraith Form. The Inviting Tomb. Bone Wall now creates a circular wall of bones that traps targets within it, but no longer has multiple charges. Ever Grasping Vestments. Bone Wall now summons a line of skeletal soldiers that charge forward in formation, damaging and knocking back enemies. Exhumant's Backbone. Bone Wall instead summons a pillar of rotting corpses that knocks targets into the air, damaging them and then slows all nearby enemies. Covet Nothing. Bone Armor now also damages nearby enemies when activated and increases their damage taken for a short time. Flickering Warmth. Bone Armor instead summons 3 bone spikes that orbit you and damage any enemies they strike. Proximal Fear. Wraith Form now causes enemies you touch to flee in fear and damages them. Sacral Chaucises. Bone Wall duration increased by 25%. Rosen's Keening. Corpse Lance damage increased by 10%. Graven Bulwark. Bone Armor duration increased by 25%. Mournful Destroyer. Dark Curse now curses the ground in an area, causing enemies within it to take continual damage. Soul Chime. Dark Curse now causes enemies to explode on death, but no longer decreases enemy vision. Guided by Maggots. Dark Curse no longer decreases enemy vision, instead causing your minions within the area to frenzy, increasing their attack and movement speed. Pierce Hammer. Command Skeletons damage increased by 10%. Clot Burst. Corpse Explosion damage increased by 10%. Priest's Grub Knife. Command Golem now summons a stone golem that throws boulders at enemies and rolls through enemies instead of leaping. Eel Tongue. Bone Spirit damage increased by 10%. Accounting for Weakness. Command Golem now summons a skeletal golem that consumes and gains power from all nearby corpses, and which damages all enemies in its path as it leaps. Desolatoria. Command Golem now summons a molten golem that continually burns all nearby enemies instead of forcing them to attack it or stunning them. Blight Maw. Bone Spear also poisons enemies hit for damage over 3 seconds. Life in Balance. 10% of all damage you take is taken by your skeletal champions instead. The Prong decreases time required to raise new skeletal champions by 30%. Pyre's Allure. Bone Wall can now be ignited with Soulfire, dealing damage over 8 seconds to nearby enemies. Baleful Trinity. Soulfire now bounces to 1 additional target, but deals 30% decreased damage to subsequent targets. Welcome End. Skeletal Mage now summons a powerful Grim Reaper, but has a longer cooldown. Dominance from Dust. Your Bone Golem will split into 2 smaller Bone Golems when it dies. Beacon of the Lead. Command Golem damage increased by 10%. Alright, that's it for this Necromancer guide for Diablo Immortal Season 1. Are you prepared for DI launch? What's your favorite Necromancer build? Tell me in the comments down below. Anyway, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.